I have no idea where to start on any of this. Every time I try and talk about music or guitar or songwriting or just being an artist, living a creative life, I can't help but talk about Burlington. And growing up in the 905 in the early 2000s, I just want to gush about the 905 board and the YMCA and the Music Center and the Polish Hall and Jersey and Grade and Always Outnumbered and the Spicoli's and Out of Options and Silverstein and Boys Night Out and Sydney and Dead and Divine and The Reason and all of these things that coalesced into a community that shaped not just me, but an entire generation of people around me. And I think that's as good a place as any to start. So, welcome to Diary of a Scene Kid.
Is this history, man? Is this being history in the making?
Growing up in suburbia in the 90s and early 2000s was a character-defining experience. I didn't have big brothers, but my friends did. And I still think to this day they are some of the biggest influences on my life and who I am today. They were in bands, they had instruments, they would sew their own clothes to go to happy hardcore raves and like punk shows in church basements. They were just the coolest. Little did I know, they were opening the door just a crack and letting me peek into a world that would later become so ingrained in my identity that I would have a midlife crisis wondering, where did the community go? One big brother in particular gave me a CD by a local band called Slurpee Monday. This was at the ripe age of 13. I had just moved. I had just gotten a guitar. Blink-182, Green Day, Newfound Glory, they were all my bands. And this was the first time it occurred to me that you didn't have to move to LA or New York to make music or be in a band. And spoiler alert, it was happening in my own backyard. One thing you have to know about Burlington is the highway is the divide. North of the highway was more of the like alternative bands, kind of what we used to refer to as like college music. And south of the highway was a lot more kind of punk rock. It was all kind of like under the punk and punk adjacent alternative umbrella, like all the music in Burlington, but that was the divide. And I grew up North Burlington, or as all the East Enders affectionately call it, Shelbyville. So, Slurpee Monday was, like I said, they were an alternative band, and they weren't my favorite by any stretch, but they were the first. And goddamn, could Mike Eastick sing. Rest in peace. So, if that CD was the crack in the wall that allowed me to see through, I would spend the next, I'd say, year and a half trying to figure out how to get in. I so badly wanted to be where the action was. I went to a predominantly jock high school. We had what you would call music nerds, but I was still in middle school at this time. So that sort of set me on the trajectory of trying to figure out, okay, if there's a local band, there's gotta be more. So the floodgates were open in the sense that I knew there were bands, and I knew I wanted to be at this Queen's feast of art and culture and music. And it took me a minute to find where this stuff was happening and to convince my parents to let me partake. But I got there eventually, and there was no turning back. So high school is when everything really changed. A crush who would eventually go on to break my heart into 1,000 pieces gave me a mixtape. It had the most perfectly curated mix of emo and punk and just local bands, and also, like indie label bands. Everything from like Ghetto Kids and Saves the Day to Grade and Jersey and Knapsack, who are still my favorite band of all time. It literally, it changed my life. That single mixtape. It would just further affirm my descent into the glorious rabbit hole that was what we called the scene. The thing about Big Brothers and Big Sisters is that every subculture has them. While I can only speak to my experience in, the local punk rock scene, there's something about someone with more life experience holding your hand or just leaving the door open a little crack for you to eventually find your way through, and joining in on whatever it is that you are ignited by. Even if it's just them being available off in a corner, willing to endure what they would say, punishment of all your burning questions about how and what and who, all of the things. I was definitely that obnoxious teenager that was like, what are the bands? What are we listening to? What shirts are we wearing? Like, that was such a special thing. And I think it's a universal experience, whether we realize it or not. In fact, I know it's universal because when I hear a lot of these guys in bands, whether they're my friends or on podcasts, talk about how they got into music, it usually stems from some big brother or some neighbor or some older cousin, big sister, and giving them the mixtape of all the good music. And I think that really speaks to something. And every scene had them or has them. That guy that has like the most obscure taste in music, but like it's really good. It's not just obscure for being like a music asshole. The act of passing down the CD or the mixtape was not just a vanity thing. It was one part tradition, and it was one part succession plan. It was ensuring that the health of the music and the culture was preserved and passed down in a way to the future generations that would then go on to, ultimately interpret it and add their own mark to what was given to them. And it was also to ensure that the youth, the children, found out about the good music, right? They were able to develop their tastes and have excellent input beyond what was just on the radio, being put out by major labels. And it ensured that the scene and the bands weren't just taking a chance on being discovered on the walls and stalls of some random bathrooms. It really was a succession plan. And I know that, it's a universal experience. And I think that is how communities are made and maintained, how they've thrived over thousands of years. I could go on about this for ages and ages, but what I do know is that I am so grateful for my big brothers. Like I have said in the title, I collect big brothers like a crow with shiny trinkets. And, we'll do like a whole thing on little brothers because I do have a little brother and His taste in music is exceptional. The idea of building a community and maintaining that community, it's so different now. And I will say it is really trippy to think about being the last generation with an analog childhood where, having access to the internet and, MySpace and all of that as we were coming of age, but still analog enough that we could get like a physical mixtape from a high school boyfriend. It was very cool. Now it's just like, I know it's sort of coming back, but because we love nostalgia, but like the accessibility, it was harder and easier all at the same time, So anyways, if you like this kind of stuff, please like it, share, subscribe, do all of the things, and ask me questions, because I have so much to share as, an elder millennial growing up in the 905 music scene, and just being like a DIY kid at heart. I can thank all of this for kind of my ethos and my approach to life, for better or for worse. That's where we'll stop. And if you like this kind of stuff, you want to nerd out with me over the 905 or your adjacent scene, New Jersey, Kansas, I'm looking at you. Feel free, leave a comment. Let's talk about being scene kids, because it was not just an isolated thing. It literally shaped an entire generation. So yeah, that's it. That's all. Thanks for being here, and I will see you next time.